Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a lot to discuss. First things first, I want to thank all of my new subscribers. I know we have had a lot of people join here over the last couple of months. I believe we've had over 100 subscribers since I announced the partnership with Believe. So thank you so much to all the new faces. If you are watching these episodes and you are not currently subscribed, if you would drop me a subscribe, rate, review over on iTunes or Apple, it really does help me out. The reason I say these things is I know about 75% of the people that watch these videos are not currently subscribed to the channel. So if you would do me a favor and subscribe, it really does help me out. As always, as I mentioned at the top, I am partnered with the Believe Podcast Network. So if you do hear any ads over on Apple or Spotify, that's because of my partnership with them, and anything that you do to help out those sponsors really does help me out as well. But we are going to get right into the show. I will let you guys know this is going to be a little bit of a different episode. And what I mean by that is we are going to talk some basketball news. And the reason we're talking basketball is I plan to have a guest on later in the week where we're going to talk almost exclusively football. So this is going to be a little bit of a basketball episode. But there have been some other things that have happened around the university, both in the athletic department and the university as a whole, that I think need to be discussed. So this is going to be a little bit of an episode that brings in some other sports that are not often talked about. I say that this is all things Alabama, and this is going to be one of those episodes where we do talk about some things that are not, often discussed. First things first is this past week we had the track and field national championships, and Alabama actually added 2 more national champions to the scorebooks. And those were Doris Lemongold, that defended her 3,000 meter steeplechase national title. She's a multiple time defending national champion in that event. She ran an 8:58, which is the first sub 9-minute time in NCAA women's history. It's currently the leading time in the world. She, it won the national title last season and has just been an absolute stalwart for the university. Like I said, again, a multiple-time defending champion at that event, just an absolute beast. This was her senior season, so this was her last time running for the university. But obviously want to congratulate her on just an absolutely incredible performance. She absolutely dominated the field in that event. Like I said, being the first sub 9-minute time. If I'm not mistaken, she won that event by over 40 seconds. So when you're talking track and field, that is something that you just do not hear very, very often. Her previous collegiate record was a 9:10, and so the fact that she was able to do that was just absolutely incredible. The other thing that I will say on the track and field front is the 400-meter national champion was Samuel Ogazi from Nigeria. He also runs for the University of Alabama. You may, if you paid attention to the Olympics or any of the track and field events there, you may recognize the name because he was a finalist at the Paris Olympics for Nigeria in that event. But he ran a 44.84, won the 400 meters for the University of Alabama. He was the only person to go sub 45 in that event. So again, Alabama, does rack up a couple of individual national titles. From the team events, they did not win the national title, but from an individual basis, you did have 2 national champions coming out of Doris Lemongold and Samuel Ghazi. So really want to congratulate them on a job well done. Another sport that, we've talked about a little bit, and, unfortunately it did not end, their season did not end how we hoped it would, is the baseball team. And there has been a lot of news on the baseball front here over the last couple of weeks, and I know I have not done a great job talking about it just because I've had so much other stuff going on, but I felt like, since we have a little bit of a break in the action, wanted to talk a little bit about that. And the big news is that Justin LeBron is back. The other big news is that Rob Vaughn got extended. So the head coach, Rob Vaughn, does get extended for 5 more seasons. He obviously has done a very good job in getting the baseball team to have the success that they have had. The next thing that you want to see out of him in that progression is being able to win in the regionals, right? You've had two regionals now that they have unfortunately went 0 I believe he's 0-4 in regionals now. So that is something that you're definitely going to want to see change. Next season you want to try to be able to host, and then obviously getting home field advantage and being able to host that regional goes a long way. That is what I really, when you're looking at a guy like that, he gets Alabama into a position where this past season Alabama went 41-18, 13th in RPI, just, was a really good team the majority of the season. But when you think about the SEC, especially in the regular season, and the SEC did not have the best postseason show out that they could have had. But the SEC, had, I believe, 8 regional hosts, and it is just a conference of absolute dominance, right? When you're talking about baseball, the SEC is the dominant conference. And so when you think about something like that, that's what you have to consider, because with the SEC being so dominant in that sport, you can be a good baseball team and still be in the bottom half of the SEC, and that's what Alabama was in this season, right? So that's where you're going to want to see, obviously, getting some additional pitching, whether it be out of the high school ranks, development, or out of the transfer portal, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Getting some additional hitting to come in around Justin LeBron. Again, we'll talk about that here in a second. But the big thing, and first and foremost, is getting a guy like Justin LeBron back. Because when you get a guy like Justin LeBron back, what it does is it, centers your team. It gives you, he's your captain, he's your main guy, and he's the guy that, I'm sure every team in America wanted him. He was a Golden Spikes finalist. He was a guy that, for a long time this season, it really looked like he might even win the Golden Spikes Award. It slowed down a little bit when it got into conference play, but for a long time, it really looked like he, may even have that locked up. And so when you have a guy that's that good on your baseball team, it means that other people want to come play with him, right? It's the same way in the professionals, right? When you think about, a guy like Steph Curry, a guy like LeBron, or if you go to baseball, you have guys like Aaron Judge or guys like Juan Soto or whoever, right? You have guys that people want to play with. And so when you have somebody that people would like to play with, that goes a long way. And so Alabama has started off very, very strong when it comes to baseball recruiting. They have already landed 5 commits out of the transfer portal. 3 of those were pitchers. And then you have 2 big hitting. Currently, both of them play second base. Obviously, they will not both play second base coming on to Alabama's team next season. I'm sure one of them will solidify the middle infield because you are going to be missing your second baseman. But, you have a guy in Justin Osterhaus, which is the highest ranked guy per 64 Analytics. 64 Analytics has him as their 53rd ranked recruit or 53rd ranked transfer portal guy. He hit last season 328 with 16 home runs, 46 RBIs. He is a guy with serious power. He played at Purdue Fort Wayne, so he played at a pretty small school. Not a conference many people have probably heard of. But, that's what you're looking at, especially in the baseball sense. A lot of baseball teams nowadays are built on transfers. Honestly, even more than what you're seeing in the basketball front, right? And obviously Alabama's team from a basketball standpoint, we've talked about it at length, has a pretty even mix of freshmen, returners, and transfers. A lot of these baseball teams, obviously you want to have your returners, but a huge percentage of these baseball teams, especially that are making it to Omaha, are having a decent amount of transfers come onto them, right? Whether it be Arkansas, I know Tennessee did it over the past couple of years. You have some teams in the SEC that are bringing in, LSU did it very famously. Paul Skeens was from Air Force. Mikey White was from NC State. You have these guys that played on these other teams and decide, hey, we're going to go to this other team, whether it's for an NIL payday, whether it's for, to play for a national title, whatever the reason is, you're stacking the team, and that allows you to, just from a baseball team, there's a lot of guys on that team. And it's just a different type of system because when you're looking at baseball as compared to like a football, somebody that's a good hitter, could be just under recruited. There's a lot of baseball teams out there. When you're talking about football, there's a size, speed, skill thing that a football player that's an SEC caliber guy you can kind of look at. Not to say there's nobody that's that caliber that's in the lower levels, because of course there is. It's just a completely different mindset. When you're looking at baseball with the number of high school teams there are, the number of people that are playing baseball, and just the, multitude of ways that somebody can impact the game on the baseball field. If they're crazy fast, they steal a ton of bases, or if they have a cannon for an arm, they're awesome in the outfield, or whatever the case may be. These are things that sometimes, go under recruited. And so some of these lower level teams, you see a lot of transfers up. You see a lot of community college going into, higher level baseball. That is a very, very, very common thing when you're talking about baseball. Honestly, similar to the major league system, right? You have guys playing their way up through the farm system to get to the major league team. That's how some of these higher level teams like Alabama and others are having to look at some of these smaller schools, is their pseudo farm system, because that's where you're developing some of your lower level talent. Not to say you're not going to get anybody at the high school level, because of course you need that. But once you get above the higher level talent, now you have a baseball team that can actually compete at the highest level. So Alabama, again, has done that fairly quickly. Alabama has 5 guys now committed, 3 pitchers and your 2 middle infielders. So we'll be very curious to see who else they add. I know there's been a lot of stir after Alabama got Justin LeBron to, reaffirm his commitment to play for Alabama next season. From the rumors that were out, obviously he had tons of offers, but, LeBron was committed to play for Alabama. There was not really any major concern that he was going to be going somewhere else. So the fact that you're able to get him back just, solidifies how good your team can be for next season. Last thing on the university front, and this one is not as much on the actual athletic front and more just on the university front, but the University of Alabama officially announced, or I guess they announced who the new president's going to be, and who they have recommended for the new president is going to be confirmed. And it's Peter Moeller. He's currently he was previously the executive vice president from Ohio State. So obviously he was with them when they won the national title in football this last season. Nick Kelly made a point to point it out that he had also studied at both North Carolina and Duke, so he's not going to be just a football guy. He's going to be somebody that's also interested in basketball, we're sure, as well. So very curious to see how all that works out. Stuart Bell was the president when I was in school. Obviously, he served the university for a very long time. Very nice guy from all accounts. But now it is time for Peter Moeller to take over. So we'll be very curious how that works out. Obviously, on the athletic front, Greg Byrne has, I'm sure been offered other jobs in other places, and as for now, has not taken anything else. So as long as Greg Byrne is at the helm, then our athletics is kind of very solidified. The question would be, long term, if Greg Burns decides to take a job at like the SEC or somewhere else, does that mean that, or that would then mean that Peter Moeller would potentially have to hire his replacement. So obviously, when you're talking about an athletic director at the University of Alabama, this is not a position that somebody takes lightly by any stretch, but the, head of the university and the head of that board of trustees is going to be, on that search committee and on trying to figure out who our next athletic director is. So that's the only thing that may come up when you're talking about athletics as it relates to the new university president. So we got all that out of the way, and lastly, we've got some basketball news that I just want to talk about. And a couple of these we have already discussed. A couple of these I want to talk about in a little bit more detail, and then we'll get out of here. So today, as I record it on Monday the 16th, we officially announced the hiring of Chris Fleming as our third assistant coach for the men's basketball team. If you've been following the channel or paid attention on Twitter, you know that this is who they were hiring from the Portland Trail Blazers. He is the offensive assistant that's going to be replacing Ryan Pannone, that took the job at Arkansas State. He is a guy that's very, very well respected in the industry. He coached for the German national team and is a guy that has had a ton of history, not only in the NBA, but also in European basketball, like I said, in Germany and Bundesliga. So he is a guy that definitely has a lot of experience, both as a head coach and as assistant. He is somebody that has had a very, very good. He has had a very good track record on offense or coaching offenses at the NBA level. Nate Oates' comment on the hiring of Chris Fleming was, "We're excited to welcome Chris to Tuscaloosa. Be a huge addition to our staff. Brings over decades worth of coaching experience in the NBA and overseas, most notably with the German national team. He's known for being exceptional player development and brings a modern approach to the game. Not only is Chris a great coach, but a high character individual. Will be a huge asset to our program. Welcome him and his family to Tuscaloosa." And then they also had a coach from the current Cavs head coach, Kenny Atkins. Chris is an outstanding basketball coach. His strong background in player development and his modern approach to the strategy of the game will help him integrate seamlessly into Nate Oates' staff at Alabama. Obviously, so, this is a guy that's very, very well respected in the industry, again, both at the NBA level and at the overseas level. So that is something that, is good, when you're looking at Nate Oates' offense. I know he tries to, you saw that with Pannone as well, having some European experience. That is something that I'm sure they're trying to help integrate when you're talking about Nate Oates' philosophy, because he has his style of basketball and his style of offense, but it's ever changing, right? Based on the players that you have, based on the people that can execute the certain things that you're trying to execute, Nate has changed his philosophy over the years. If you have a big that can shoot versus a big that can't versus a whatever, right? Everything changes how that philosophy goes. And having a guy that is an offensive guru, again, that has that experience at multiple levels of basketball, will be a huge addition to our offense. And I'm very curious to see how that translates onto the basketball court. I know Ryan Pannone is big shoes to fill. He was very well known about posting random, out of bounds underplays from some league you've never heard of in Turkey or something. Some league you may have never heard of over in Turkey. So I am very curious to see, what quirks or, how Chris Fleming is as a basketball coach, and does it play out on the court, and how does that work out? So I'm very, very curious to see how that all works out. The other one is Nate Oates. I know I previously mentioned that he was going to be doing this, but he is officially at Team USA, the U19 basketball camp. So the Team USA U19 basketball camp, they have the team has been assembled, and he's one of the on-the-court coaches, was offered to be that by Tommy Lloyd from Arizona as one of the coaches helping out with that. There are a lot of guys on that roster, some of which are currently committed or are going to school this coming season, like Jasper Johnson or AJ DeBansa or some others, which Nate either recruited or spoke to. We got Mikael Brown and others that Alabama unfortunately missed out on for a variety of different reasons. And there are also two guys in that are currently uncommitted, but have made their way onto the roster, or onto the current camp roster, and that is Caleb Holt and Darion Rippey. The reason I mention these two guys, and we're going to kind of shift over to Alabama recruiting for basketball, is Caleb Holt was on an unofficial visit to Alabama just last week. So, as of the time that I recorded one of the episodes last week, he was on an unofficial visit. And, he is a name that Alabama is definitely after, full bore going to see. So obviously Nate Oates being able to be there and be a coach with him for this U19 camp. Obviously it's going to be, he's not the main coach, so it is going to be a little bit different, but obviously having hands-on experience with a coach like that, any of the players that are there that are uncommitted, that is a big deal to have your coach be one of the ones that's helping them out with that. The other one that I mentioned was Darion Rippey. He actually is again another guy that Alabama is on after, very big, and he has actually set an official visit to Alabama, and this was set before the basketball camp. and it was set for September the 13th. If you remember back, that is the same date that Jackson Richardson is going to be coming on campus, the brother of Jason Richardson, son of Jason Richardson, that I previously talked about in another episode. So that's shaping up to be a very large recruiting weekend for Alabama basketball. From what I have heard, they have not set an official date with Caleb Holt for an official visit. I would expect, obviously, Nate and Preston to try to lock one down for Caleb Holt for an actual official. We'll be very curious when that comes out. I will, of course, report it whenever it does come out. The other two, we have two more guys that have set official visit dates. One of them, I'm unaware of the date, just unfortunately, because I don't have On3. I know Joe Tipton, kind of teased that Colbin Landrew, which is currently a 4-star guy across most recruiting services. For some reason, ESPN doesn't have him rated, but he is a guy who has set an official visit with Alabama, as well as Terrace Bowie did set an official visit for September the 6th. So early football season, some of those early weekends, that's often when you'll see Nate Oates and Preston bringing in guys. Obviously, he does mention about how he has to be very careful about who they bring in for an official visit because they don't want to bring in somebody that's just there to see an Alabama football game. He does want, obviously, people to actually show up that might be interested in coming to Alabama. These are very serious people looking to commit. Whether they commit to Alabama or not, they don't have to guarantee they're committing. They just have to, it has to be an actual fit for us, not just, offering somebody a visit so they can come watch a football game. Because I know that happened a lot, like with your Alabama-Georgia game last season, for example. So that is kind of what you're looking at when you're looking at some of these, recruits. Again, Alabama now has, 5 guys that we've been closely linked to. I'm sure there are many, many others, but, the names that we've been linked to over the last week or so have been Caleb Holt. Again, he was on campus on an unofficial. You got Daron Rippey, who has set his date for September the 13th, the same date that Jackson Richardson will be on campus. Then you got Colbin Landrew and Terrace Bowie. Again, Terrace Bowie is going to be on September the 6th. So Alabama basketball recruiting is, getting very quickly moving. I am curious, because they went out, and I previously mentioned about how they went out and started meeting with some of the early 2026 guys a little earlier than they had in years past. It does sound like they've made some headway with some of the higher ranked recruits. Most of the ones that we've mentioned, in this are all 5 of these guys are top 100 guys. Caleb Holt, Daron Rippey, Jackson Richardson are all more highly ranked than that. I believe they're top 50 guys or even better. So, these are very top recruits that Alabama is in with. Again, with Nate Oates coaching in that U19 basketball camp that Caleb Holt and Daron Rippey are both members of, that is something that I am very curious to see what type of impact that's going to have on their potential recruitment. Now, obviously, Nate Oates is not the only coach that is coaching them, that is also probably recruiting them at the same time. This is not, giving us some advantage over some other team, but I am very curious to see, does that play out in our favor where, these players have now seen what Nate Oates' coaching style is like, up close and personal, obviously with him having coached for their camp, and then obviously coming on the official visit. Would be very curious to see if we could lock down either Holt or Rippey. I know both guys are seen as very good defenders as well as great scorers, so I am very curious to see how Alabama basketball recruiting does shape out. As I previously mentioned at the top of the show, I do have an interview that I plan to get recorded. I'm trying to schedule the time with one of the guys. It's funny enough, it's actually another group that's partnered with Believe, but they cover Alabama football very, very closely. You will recognize the name and the group that he's with, just as a little bit of a tease. I do plan to talk a lot of football recruiting and other things with him. And we will talk all about Alabama football. So that's why we went super heavy on the basketball in this episode. I know people kind of split in between both sports that follow the channel. So if as always, if there's anything you are interested in that I did not cover, throw it down in the comments. I do read all the comments. I try to reply to as many of them as I can. I'm happy to cover anything that comes up. I know this episode was a little bit unique because we did cover some track and field and baseball that isn't always covered on the channel, but I try to cover, again, major things that happen around the university. That's kind of my goal with this channel and I thought that obviously winning a national title is something that needs to be shouted out. So I wanted to shout them out for this purpose. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.